March 13th, 1964, Kew Gardens, Queens. It's a little after 3 in the morning, and a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese is walking from her car to her front door. She never makes it. And the story that grows out of that night becomes one of the most repeated tales in the history of psychology. The story went like this. 38 of her neighbors came to their windows. They watched, they listened, and not one of them called for help. 38 witnesses and complete silence. That number launched 1,000 lectures and one very uncomfortable question. If that many people can watch and do nothing, what does that say about us? Today we will do two things: show you what the science actually found, and show you why the story you just heard is, in the most important ways, wrong. Welcome to Mind Flair with Dr. Jones, where we peel back the layers of human behavior and extract the finer details of psychology. Let's get into it. Psychologists gave the phenomenon a name, the bystander effect, and the claim at its center is genuinely counterintuitive. So put it plainly, the more people who witness an emergency, the less likely any single one of them is to help. Alone, you can act. In a crowd, you freeze. Now, your intuition probably rebels at that. More people should mean more help, more hands, more phones, more eyes. Safety in numbers, right? That's what makes this effect so interesting. It runs directly against common sense. And in science, when something runs against common sense, you don't argue about it at the dinner table. You test it. So in the late 1960s, two social psychologists, John Darley and Bibb Latané, set out to do exactly that. They were haunted by the Genovese story, but they weren't satisfied with a headline. They wanted to know whether a crowd really does suppress helping, and if it does, why? And the only way to answer that is to bring the emergency into a room where you control everything, except the one thing that you're studying. Here is the experiment that started it all. A college student arrives and is told they'll be discussing personal problems with other students. And to protect everyone's privacy, they'll each sit in a separate room and talk over an intercom, one microphone at a time. It sounds mundane. That ordinariness is the point. What the student doesn't know is that all the other voices are recordings, and the study has nothing to do with personal problems. Here's the crucial variable. Some students are led to believe just one other person is on the intercom. Some believe there are two others. And some believe there are 5 people on the line, themselves and 4 others. The discussion begins, and partway through, one of the voices, a young man who spoke earlier about struggling with seizures, begins to falter. He stammers. He says he needs help. He says he thinks he's having a seizure. And then he chokes and goes silent. Now, notice the design here. The student is physically alone in the room. They can't see anyone react. They can't take a cue from a face. All they have is a number in their head. How many other people are on this line? That's the whole experiment. Strip away everything except the perceived size of the group. Now, the clock is running, and the question is brutally simple. Will the student leave their room to get help? And how long will it take? Here's what they found. When the student believed they were the only one who could hear the emergency, 85% went for help quickly. When they believed one other person could also hear it, that dropped to 62%. And when they believed 4 others were listening, that they were one of 5, only 31% went for help in time. Look at that slope. Nothing changed about the emergency itself. The young man's need was identical in every version. The only thing that changed was a number in the student's head, how many other people they believed were listening, and that number cut helping by more than half. And there's a second layer to those numbers. In the alone condition, essentially everyone eventually helped. They just did it quickly and decisively. In the large group condition, many never came out at all, and those who did took far longer, sometimes agonizing in place while the seconds ran. Speed matters in an emergency. Hesitation is its own kind of failure. And now the finding that genuinely unsettled the researchers. The students who didn't go for help were not callous. Many sat in their rooms, visibly distressed, trembling, sweating, hands shaking. Afterward, they asked, "Is he okay? Is he being helped?" They cared. They were in real anguish, and they still didn't move. Whatever was stopping them, it wasn't a lack of compassion. And their personalities, how kind or bold they scored on every test the researchers gave, predicted almost nothing. The situation predicted everything. So the effect is real. The obvious next question is the interesting one. Why? Why would knowing that other people are present make a caring person hesitate? The research points to 3 quiet mechanisms working underneath awareness. Let's take them one at a time. Mechanism 1, diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only witness, 100% of the responsibility to act sits squarely on you. There's no one to defer to, but add 9 other people, and something happens in your gut, automatically. That responsibility feels like it splits. It divides across everyone present. Each person carries a thinner slice, and someone should help quietly becomes someone else will. To see how deep this goes, the team ran a second experiment. No seizure this time. No drama. Students filled out a questionnaire in the waiting room, and while they worked, smoke began pouring in through a vent in the wall. Real smoke, enough to make it hard to see. If your room is filling with smoke, you report it. When students were alone, 75% got up and reported the smoke. But when they sat with 2 other people who, by arrangement, simply kept working and said nothing, only 10% reported it. 10. The rest sat in a smoke-filled room, coughing, waving it from their faces, and did nothing, because no one else seemed alarmed. That reveals mechanism 2, pluralistic ignorance. In an ambiguous moment, none of us want to overreact, so we do something totally natural. We glance around to see how everyone else is responding. The problem is that everyone else is doing the same thing. They're glancing at you. And because you're trying to look calm while you read the room, you look calm. So does everyone. We each use the group's calm as evidence there's no emergency. And that group talks itself silently out of acting. There's a third mechanism, subtler still, audience inhibition, sometimes called evaluation apprehension. When other people are watching, acting carries a social risk. What if I rush over and it's nothing? What if I misread it and I look foolish or make it worse? The presence of an audience raises the cost of being wrong, so we hesitate, not because we don't care, but because we're afraid of the judgment that comes with acting. And these mechanisms aren't only about strangers. In another study, participants heard a woman in the next room fall and cry out in pain. She'd hurt her ankle and couldn't get up. When people were waiting alone, 70% went to help. Paired with a stranger, that fell to 20%. 2 polite strangers freezing each other in place. And if the stranger was a Confederate who deliberately stayed calm and did nothing, helping collapsed to under 10%. But here's the humane twist. Pairs of friends helped about 40% of the time, and they helped faster and were far less inhibited than pairs of strangers. Familiarity dissolves the audience problem. When you're with someone you trust, you're not performing calm for them, so you're freer to act. Now, Latine and Darley did something amazing because it turns all of this from an accusation into a map. They argued that helping a stranger isn't one decision, it's 5 in sequence. 5 yes or no gates. And to help, you have to clear all 5. A single no at any gate, and help never arrives. Watch how many places the crowd can trip you. Step 1. You have to notice that something is happening. Sounds trivial, but in a busy, crowded world, heads down, earbuds in, we filter constantly. The more crowded and hurried the scene, the easier it is to simply not register the event at all. Step 2. You have to interpret it as an emergency. This is where pluralistic ignorance strikes. The ambiguous slump on a bench, the raised voices that might be a fight or might be a game. If everyone around you looks unbothered, you're far more likely to file it under probably nothing. Step 3. You have to assume responsibility. Decide it's on you to act. This is where diffusion of responsibility does its damage, splitting that duty across every bystander until it feels like no one's job in particular. Step 4. You have to know how to help. Do you call someone? Do CPR? Step between them? Uncertainty here freezes even willing people. And step 5. You have to actually do it. Override the fear of embarrassment and act in front of an audience. Notice the shape of this. 5 gates. The crowd makes at least 3 of them harder. The wonder isn't that people sometimes fail to help, it's that, as we'll see, they so often still do. So the lab effect is solid, which brings us back to the 38 witnesses, the story that started all of it. And here's something that took the field decades to fully confront. When researchers went back to the court transcripts, the police records, the trial testimony, the famous version of that night fell apart. In 2007, a team led by Rachel Manning did the archival work, and there's no evidence that 38 people watched the attack and did nothing. Most who heard something caught only a fragment in the night and had no idea a murder was happening. The attack actually occurred in 2 separate locations, so almost no one saw the whole thing. At least 2 people did call the police. And the assistant district attorney who tried the case said that in reality, they could only find about half a dozen who saw anything at all. And here is the detail the legend erased completely. As Kitty lay dying, a neighbor, Sophia Farrar, who had no idea whether the attacker was still there, ran down the stairs, out into the dark, and held Kitty in her arms so she wouldn't die alone. The archival reappraisal makes this plain. The night of the 38 who did nothing contained at least 2 calls to the police and a woman who ran toward danger to confront a dying friend. That is almost the opposite of the story we were told. 38 was never a finding. It was essentially a headline, one that everyone repeated because it was vivid and it fit a story we were ready to believe about ourselves. And here's how sticky that story became. The parable of the 38 witnesses appeared uncorrected in all 10 of the best-selling introductory psychology textbooks. The myth outran the science in the very books meant to teach the science. It gets deeper. In 2017, Saul Casson re-examined the whole case, and he found that the unresponsive bystander narrative didn't even begin with a reporter chasing a story. It took shape in the police account first, then hardened into a legend. The same investigation, he showed, also produced false confessions. People who confessed to crimes they didn't commit. One tidy, confident story, repeated enough times, buried a much messier truth and cost real people their freedom. We should be careful here, because this is the exact place where people overcorrect. The myth being wrong does not make the science wrong. Darley and Latane's effect is real. We watched it happen in the lab. What's false is the cultural fable built on top of it. the cynical, satisfying idea that a crowd simply turns people into cold, unmoving spectators. That part was never true. So the honest question is the quantitative one. How strong is the real effect? And what happens when we leave the lab? To answer how strong, you don't want one more study. You want all of them pooled. That's a meta-analysis. And in 2011, a team led by Peter Fisher did exactly that. They combined 50 years of bystander research, 105 separate effects, more than 7,000 participants, into a single estimate. Two findings, and both matter. First, the bystander effect is real. Across all those studies, more bystanders did reduce helping, an effect size of about minus 0.35, which in this field counts as moderate and dependable, not overwhelming, not trivial, real. So this isn't debunked, it's confirmed. But the second finding is the one nobody expects. The effect gets weaker exactly when it should. In clearly dangerous emergencies where there's a real threat or a visible physical perpetrator, the freezing shrinks. When the stakes are unmistakable, a crowd is far less likely to hold you back. Real danger cuts through the fog. Sit with how reassuring that is. The bystander effect is strongest in the ambiguous, low-stakes moments, the dropped papers, the maybe lost tourist, and weakest in the genuine, high-stakes emergencies we actually fear. Evolution and empathy didn't abandon us where it counts. But the strongest evidence isn't in the lab at all. In 2019, a team led by Richard Philpott did something new. They got hold of real public surveillance footage, actual street conflicts caught on camera across 3 cities on 2 continents, Amsterdam, Cape Town, and Lancaster. 219 real conflicts, not actors, not questionnaires, real people, real danger, real time. In at least 91% of those conflicts, more than 9 in 10, at least one bystander stepped in to calm the aggressor, to physically block them, to help the victim up and away. And the single most important detail, the one that turns the legend completely inside out, the more bystanders who were present, the higher the odds that someone intervened. In the real world, a crowd didn't freeze people. A crowd made help more likely. And this is why that study carries so much weight. For 50 years, almost everything we knew about bystanders came from staged emergencies with college students who knew they were in a study. This was different. Hidden cameras, real strangers, genuine violence, and no one performing for a researcher. When you finally watch what people actually do when the stakes are real and no one's testing them, the answer is, overwhelmingly, they help. The lab told us the effect exists. The street tells us how the story usually ends. So let's put the citations together, because they leave us somewhere far more useful than where the legend did. The tidy, cynical story that a crowd turns us into cowards is mostly myth. What's true is subtler. In an unclear, low-stakes moment, the presence of others can make each of us hesitate because responsibility feels shared, and shared responsibility feels like no one's. And that single sentence tells you exactly how to defeat it. If you're ever the one who needs help, do not shout to the crowd. The crowd diffuses. Point to one person. You, in the red jacket. Call 911 right now. The instant one specific human being becomes responsible, the entire effect collapses. You've walked them straight through all 5 steps in a single sentence. And if you're the bystander, be the one who breaks the spell. Move first, because the research is clear. The moment one person acts, everyone else is freed to follow. This is exactly why first aid and CPR courses now teach you to point and assign. You call for help. You get the defibrillator. They're not being bossy. They're engineering around diffusion of responsibility on purpose, turning a diffuse crowd into named individuals with a job. Once you can see the mechanism, you can design against it in a classroom, an office, a train platform, anywhere people gather. Awareness itself is a countermeasure. Simply knowing about the bystander effect makes you more likely to act when your moment comes. The science that sounds like an indictment of people turns out to be an instruction manual for helping them. That's what we do here. Take the story you think you know and check it against the sources. Every study from today is linked below. If you learned something, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next Mind Flair.